ahead now.
Okay, so I am Deborah. I hope you will forgive me. I'm not going to do the long introduction. I'm going to hope people know you. Dr. Deborah Achtenberg, retired from being a professor of philosophy at UNR, and also an interest in lots of diversity stuff, but in French, particularly French philosophers, which I think has poor thing sent her to Paris and all kinds of French studies. And I will let you just take it over, Deborah, and tell me or tell us how you want to operate in terms of questions and all that good stuff, and go.
Okay, well, thank you. And I am working on French philosophy. It's mostly French Jewish philosophy, and it includes some philosophers who are North African. So that's the tie-in to all of this. And I'm going to share my screen with you. Let me get this up. And can you all see that?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I want to move you all to the top so I can see you a little bit. So here's how I am going to proceed with this. I have about an hour's worth of material, but I don't want to just talk for an hour. So what I'll do is I'll divide it into 3 parts. So I'll talk for a while and show you things for a while, and then stop and take your questions on that part. And then I'll talk for a while and stop and take about 10 minutes more discussion. And then I'll do the same thing. And then we'll end with 10 minutes of discussion. So, you know, if you have a question, if you want to, you might make a note so you don't forget your question. And also, it doesn't have to be a question, but I'm talking about a lot of different things. And you might also just want me to expand on something. So that's how we'll proceed. Let me make that a little bigger. So you probably have heard of Edith Piaf, the famous French chanteuse or singer. But have you heard of Lean Monty, the North African Edith Piaf, who is actually Jewish from Algeria? So I'm going to play about 3 minutes of this recording for you to listen to.
عشق الزين حتى حبابي كروني
So that's one of many North African Jewish musicians. It's interesting that many, maybe even most, I'm not sure, but many of the popular musicians in North Africa in the 30s and 40s were Jewish, like she is. You probably saw there that she's singing in Arabic. This is a great video I found online that has subtitles in English so you can understand what she's singing. And she was born in 1926 in the largest city in Algeria, Algiers, and then moved to Paris where she died in 2003. And she sang in French later, and also sang songs like the songs that Edith Piaf sang, not just like these. So here are a few more. I'll just show you some short clips of some of the others so you can get a sense of how many there actually were. Start.
Deborah, I think if you've moved our pictures up to the top, they're blocking a little bit of the screen. I got like a gray glob across the top. I don't know if that's our pictures or not.
Oh, are they? Oh, those are in the way. Oh, okay. Thank you. I didn't realize that. Let me just get rid of them for now. Thank you.
I think that's what that is. I could be wrong. I don't know.
Oops. Let me find where I want to start here. These are all Algerian.
Yeah, it's better.
Thank you, Myra.
That fixed it.
Oh, hold on. I have to do something here. Go back a little. So this is a set of short clips of some Algerian popular musicians.
مول المعدة ما يتهنى ما عنده راحات ساعة ودقيقات يبدل الصفات يبنى يطاحي لجات يا بالشار
نعشق في البنات لا لوم عليا وحدة بيضة والأخرى خمرية
بلاصدار مو بولفار سيقان طريقهم ماشية بالنشان سلم على ناس الحمر يضيفوك ويديروا البشان سبتني طفلة زينها مكان صرت في خلفها نجري
اللي يغير يا قليل النية ما تسلقش 1% اللي نيسو صافية خليفتيها ولا يفضحك ما بين الغاشي
ما زال قلبي يفرح وتزول عليا الغبينة
قلبي وقلبك مجروح وللزوج مدى قاسينا
So this is a lot
ورث عيني عبد الثلج والدماء تتسابغ بين
مال حبيبي ماله شوقني في خياله اللي مدار الجواله
عندك جبين ضاوي وحواتب سابغين غرة من القمر شرقت في لوزان دش مكتوب
One of
في
my favorite.
الجبين أعذرني يا سادات نوري في القلب جداد
ريت الزين 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 هالزين بالخانة كحلة العين هاي مزيانة.
So we'll stop with that very handsome Salim Halali, who ended up in Paris, actually was saved by the head of the mosque from being killed by the Nazis. So what about and by the way, if you're interested in any of this North African Jewish music, I put in a couple of links. This academic named Chris Silver is recovering French North African music one record at a time. He's a fascinating guy and he posts lots of great music. So what about the Jews in North Africa? Prior to European colonization, Jews and Muslims in North Africa often got along fairly well. They contributed to each other's culture and religion. They weren't equal. It wasn't a golden age or a Garden of Eden or something like that. But they did have a protected status that some of you probably know about called dhimmi status, which on the negative side involved extra taxation, but also involved protecting the Jews. The problems really started by and large with colonization in North African countries. You know, France colonized Algeria and Morocco and Tunisia. The Italians colonized Libya, etc. And the colonization tended to set Jews and Muslims against each other. For example, in Algeria, when Jews were given citizenship, which was kind of unusual actually, but Jews got citizenship, even though they were colonized by the French, they got citizenship in Algeria under the Crémieux decree, which I can talk about if you're interested. But the fact that they got citizenship and the Muslims didn't created a lot of resentment. They were sometimes seen as collaborators with the colonialists because of that. And also they very quickly assimilated because getting French citizenship was really good for them. They could have French businesses and so forth. And they stopped wearing the Muslim style clothing and stopped speaking Arabic and started speaking French, at least a lot of them. They were kind of Frenchified or modernized. Also with help from this Jewish Enlightenment institution called the Alliance Israélite Universelle, or the Universal Israelite Alliance, which is a French organization that came and helped Jews in North Africa and the Middle East. It's also true that new scholarship is showing that some of the violence later between, I mean, they got along pretty well, but there are some well-known incidents of violence that are used to show some kind of problems. And some of the latest scholarship actually shows that the violence, for example, in this case of the Constantine riots in 1934, were actually organized by Algerian Muslims who were influenced by French fascism. So some of the conflict between Jews and Muslims in North Africa was imported from France. Here are some, can you all see that? I hope you can see the synagogue.
Yeah.
Okay. I got this, I'll show you the book that I got this out of, but this is a photograph of a synagogue in Algiers. I assume that's supposed to be Algiers. Yeah, Algiers, not Alger. That's the French. Algiers is the largest city in Algeria, and it shows the Islamic motifs. And here's a really interesting photograph from Benjamin Storr, one of the Jewish scholars of North African Judaism. He's a really great scholar. So look at this and notice how differently they're all dressed. It's the Zawi family in Algeria, a Jewish family in Algeria. And notice here it's traditional dress. Yeah, I like the mustache too. This is traditional dress. This is, but notice here, the modernizing or the Frenchifying. And look at the young girl, she's dressed in European clothing. So that came out of this book, which is a really great book if you want to learn about relations between Jews and Muslims. It's kind of state-of-the-art, new scholarship. Well, it's a few years old, but relatively new scholarship. And it's extremely readable. And it's also beautiful. The photographs are beautiful and the paintings are beautiful, and you can get it on, you can buy it on Kindle and watch it on your computer, and the photographs are even more beautiful that way. A lot of good work on topics like I was talking about just now. And then this book, let me make this bigger. This book is one of the books in recent scholarship that I was talking about that shows that the Constantine murders actually were committed by a Muslim who was influenced by first French nationalists, fascist nationalists, and then he became a supporter of Vichy, believe it or not, and also a supporter of the Nazis. So it's a complicated topic, but it's not that there was some original just hatred between Jews and Muslims. It was much more complicated by the fact that there was colonialism in North Africa. So how did the Jews get to North Africa? Some of them came in the first few centuries of the Common Era, you know, basically after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70. But I think some of that is still up for grabs among history scholars, exactly how they came, where they came, and what it was all about. And then a lot came when the Jews were expelled from Spain in 1492. The year that Columbus sailed the ocean blue was also the year that the Jews were expelled from Spain, and a lot of them went to North Africa after that. Why did they leave North Africa? You probably know that there aren't very many left in North Africa. There are only about 200 left in Algeria. It's very sad, just very, very sad. So, and you may also know that there were 800,000 plus Jews who left North Africa in mid 20th century. 800,000, more than 800,000 left in mid-century. So why did they leave? Many were expelled. Some chose to leave because they saw that their situation would be unstable. And of course, some left because they wanted to move to Israel, you know, they wanted to make Aliyah. But a way to think about it is that it was a combination of tensions surrounding nationalism. So remember, nation states were formed there. And when they were decolonized, and also when Israel was formed, that created a lot of tension, both just the new nations. The new nations had a spirit of nationalism, so that it created some tension, and also there was some tension because of the founding of Israel. So it's a terrible chapter in history, and something that we should think about when we think about the problems of the Jews in the 20th century is not just to think about the Shoah, but to think about the expulsion of Jews from North Africa and the Middle East in mid-century. What about intellectuals in North Africa? Well, you know, there's a whole lot to say about this, more than I could even touch on. But I thought I'd just show you three who are pretty interesting that you may know about, but you might not know that they were Jews from North Africa. this is Jacques Derrida, the famous father of, or founder of, or practitioner of, terms he would have hated actually, of deconstruction. So he's one of the most important postmodern thinkers in France, and also often thought of as being a French philosopher, but actually was Jewish from Algeria. And here's another person that some of you may know. This is her speaking about 4 or 5 years ago at a conference in Berlin. This is Hélène Cixous. I'll show you her name later so you can see how that's spelled. But if you ever took a course, depending on when you studied things that had to do with feminism, she is one of the, what were called the French feminists, very influential wave in feminist thinking. But actually, she also is a Jew from Algeria who moved to France. And now, I mean, she's written on all kinds of topics, not just on feminism since that era. And she's doing a lot of writing on her own experiences as a young woman in Algeria. And this very interesting guy from Tunisia, his name is Albert Memmi. I'll show you Memmi in a minute, his book. But Memmi wrote a classic work on colonialism. So for any of you who are familiar with the classic works on colonialism by Frantz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth, Frantz Fanon, a black man from Martinique, or Aimé Césaire's Colonialism, another classic on colonialism. Albert Memmi, who was Jewish from Tunisia, also wrote a classic which is called The Colonizer and the Colonized, which is really interesting because he talks about the negative effects of colonialization, not just on the colonized, but also on the colonizer. He then wrote just a huge number of books over time, fiction, essays, theory, and he also wrote some things critical of the decolonial nations, and also wrote various things in support of the state of Israel. Here's his book, The Colonizer and the Colonized. Oh, that's actually smaller, sorry. Notice that here it has an introduction by Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre was along with supporting all the colonized people in Africa and other parts of the world. He also was always concerned about the Jews. At every stage of his intellectual life, he was thinking more about what in France they call the Jewish question. And he had many Jewish friends, Jewish lovers, and cared very deeply about the problems of the Jews, along with the problems of colonialization. So he wrote this introduction, and Memmi was, of course, influenced by him. Here's Jacques Derrida writing Indifference, in which he exploded on the scene with this very exciting book. And here's Hélène Cixous. So Derrida's background was that his family moved to Algeria from Spain when the Jews left Spain. Cixous' background is part German and part, she thinks, probably Berber. This unusual last name she thinks may be Berber. You know, Berber carpets and the word Berber. It's the indigenous people of Algeria, not the Arabs, but the indigenous people who are either called Berber or Amazigh or Kabyle, different names from them. And sometimes people talk about the Berber Jews because the Jews who were in North Africa mixed and intermarried with the indigenous people as well. So let me stop there and let me stop sharing my screen so I can see you all and see if you have any questions or any things you'd like me to talk about in all of that. Any questions, comments?
Well, I just want to make a comment that really brought back Ethan and Annabelle's wedding, because that's exactly the kind of music that they played.
Oh,
and,
really?
and yes, and they had bands playing it. In fact, the best part of the wedding was this, they're like the betrothal thing that was 3 days before I mean, they had that kind of music at both of the wedding. I mean, it seemed like a wedding. This huge party with bread and honey.
Pain et miel.
Pain et miel, they called it.
Oh, nice.
But they had this music, and all of her relatives, they all knew how to dance, not just the women, but the men. They were doing this kind of like, like, yeah, they could move the top of their shoulders like independent from the bottom of their bodies. I don't know how, dancing to that kind of music.
And one of Annabelle's family names is Perez.
Yes, what her father's, Perez is her maiden name. So she thinks, that seems like obviously, from Spain, but the mother's side was a name, Abe Cassis, I think. So that's a more indigenous kind of, maybe Berber kind of.
Abe Cassis, I think, is probably Arabic.
Yeah. And all the song, when we thought, oh, our son is marrying a North African Jew, like we started listening to Sephardi music. We thought it's going to be Sephardi.
No.
Not at all. It was all Arabic. And her grandmother and great aunt, when they talked together, Ethan met them. The great aunt was still alive. The grandma was not. They spoke Arabic. Oh, and another story that relevant to what you said about them getting along well. Annabelle's mother remembers that when they would go to public baths, she left when she was about 15, 16. They sent her
Algeria
out to escape the war. She said that the mikveh was part of the public baths. So that all the women would be together, Arab and Jewish women would be together, and then the Jews would go off in this other room where the mikveh was. That's how much they got along.
Oh, that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your daughter-in-law's background is Moroccan and Algerian, right?
Well, what the story was that they were a Moroccan family, that they were on their way to make Aliyah, and the great grandmother or something, grandmother maybe. So Annabelle's grandmother's grandmother or whatever.
Great grandmother. Right?
Yeah. So she was pregnant, and they had to stop there and then they just stayed. They never kept moving.
They stopped in Algeria.
Oh, and they were from Oran, O-R-A-N. I saw some of those people. The names, their names were that.
In the short clips. Well, one thing I wanted to mention about their music is it always starts out with a very long, slow part, and then it gets faster later.
Right.
I don't know if you noticed that. So when they did the clips, they had to make a decision whether to take it from the introduction or to take it from the other part. By the way, that long introduction is called a makam. That word may sound familiar to you because it's like the word makam.
Place. Yeah. Wow. That's cool.
Ah, interesting.
But scales in Arabic music are called makams, places. Like we have topos means topic, topos means place. Yeah, and if you notice, there were two singers. You talked about Oran. Oran is the second largest city in Algeria. One reason I keep talking about Algeria a lot is because that's actually what I am working on more. But there were two singers from Oran. One was Saoud Loranez, older, right? He had the fez, the hat on, the older hat. And then Renette Loranez, which means Queenie from Oran, was his student. She was blind. I don't know if you noticed, she had dark glasses on. She was a blind singer. And she sang, and these people were very modernized. You notice she was dressed in modern clothes. And she also sang in French, both French and Arabic.
May I ask you the name of the first woman who sang like Edith Piaf? There were two names. One was Lulila. I'm not sure if that was the title. And Eliane Sarfati. Was it Lulila? Was that her name?
That was the name of the song.
So it's Eliane Sarfati. That was so beautiful. I have to look it up.
She is just a beautiful singer. She's a very interesting woman. Her name was Eliane Sarfati. Jane, your friend Lior. It's the same name as Lior Sarfati, who's at Chokmat. It's a North African name. I'm assuming that Lior is probably North African as a result of that. but her name was Eliane, but her nickname was Lean. And she had a stage name, which was Lean Monty. A lot of these people like Blonde. That obviously is not his name. He was albino, so they called him Blonde. Her name was Lean Monty, and she also was an actress. You know, these are very interesting people. They sang, like I said, if you go online, you'll find her singing some songs you would think you were listening to Edith Piaf. She sang things in that style as well. Somebody.
I traveled to Morocco, and it's been, I don't know how long it's been now. It's been a while. And I remember our guide, who was a Moroccan Muslim, was just like heartbroken and totally befuddled as to why the Jews had left when so many of them, mostly there was a tiny community left, but hardly any. And they had mostly left and gone to Israel when Israel became a state. And he was just bereft about it.
Well, that's a really interesting thing about Morocco in particular. Oh, I noticed, by the way, Edna, your hand's up. I'll call on you next. Morocco had less problems. There were less problems between the Jews and the Arabs in Morocco. And many Moroccans in recent years have been trying to kind of dig up their Jewish history. And now, of course, one kind of positive thing, if there were any, from our previous president is the reopening of relations between Israel and Morocco.
Right.
So, and also there's a really wonderful singer in Israel named Neda El-Kayam, who is reviving the old Jewish music from Morocco and redoing it. I didn't include that because it's really more of not a French North African story, but of an Israeli North African story. So when Jews left North Africa, where did they go? And some of them went to Israel. Some went to France. You know, in Algeria, a lot went to France because Algeria, uniquely, Jews had citizenship. So when they got there, it was an easy transition. Edna, you have your hand up. You're muted. You're muted, Edna.
Oh,
there we go.
Two things. One related to, kind of related to what Laura was talking about. I got my 23andMe results back today, and I have Berber ancestry, which was a complete surprise. North African Berber.
That's
completely a surprise.
That's exciting.
But a nice one. And the other thing is, what do you see as the difference between the North African expulsion of Jews and the Mideastern expulsion of Jews in modern era?
The Mideastern, you mean, where are you?
Iran, Iraq.
It's all related. You can see that I have a focus on certain countries. That, you know, I'm not a historian really, I'm a philosopher, but I know about all these things partly because I like them, but also partly because I'm writing about people from those countries. But, you know, in Iraq, for example, in the 30s, I think it is, all the members of the Iraqi radio orchestra were Jewish.
I knew they were highly.
Isn't that interesting? It's just
encultured into the. Yeah.
And there's a couple of famous Jewish musicians from Iraq, the Kuwaiti brothers, Daoud and Saleh Kuwaiti. And so, you know, the same things were going, when I said there were, gave the figures, which I hope were right, of the people who left or were expelled. I mean, you know, some were not expelled. The Jews in Algeria were not expelled. They just, you know, if you saw Sheikh Raymond, very popular musician, when the revolution happened, he was killed. And a lot of the, you know, even if Jews supported the revolution, they were seen as being part of they were seen as French. They were Frenchified, as I like to call it, and modernized, and their situation was unstable, and they thought it would be unstable after the war. Natalie, you have your hand up.
Yeah, when I went on an ulpan to Israel when I was 17, which was 1965, we stayed in what was called a children's village, which was an agricultural school, and the kids there had been sent. They did not have family in Israel, and the majority of them were North African and Middle Eastern. And my best friend there was from Morocco. She and her brother had been sent by their family. And I wonder whether it was because the family was afraid of something happening in Morocco, or whether it was because Israel was making a gigantic effort to get Jews from the rest of the world to make Aliyah. I don't know which it was, but I do know that she was 16 and her brother was, I think, 14. But they had been sent by their family, and their family was still in Morocco.
Yeah.
And they were French speakers.
I mean, you, by the way, I don't know if you all know this, but technically speaking, you could say Israel is a Francophone country, because there are so many people in Israel who speak French because they're from French North Africa or other places. Well, now also from France, that technically speaking, it could be called Francophone as well as a Hebrew speaking country. But, you're right that Israel is always hoping people will make Aliyah. So that's an element too. I don't want to downplay the fact that people were expelled from some countries, lost all their property. It's a terrible thing, and we don't talk about it enough. It was a terrible trauma for many of them, especially given the history of there being good relations in the past. But it is also true that whenever there's a crisis, Israel helps people, but also loves for people to move to Israel. I mean, because they want people to be in Israel. And, sometimes people left because it was prudent. In that period after Sheikh Raymond was killed, a lot of Jews got out. In Algeria, most of the Jews left in the 60s, around the time of the new nationalism of Algerian independence, when they threw off the French. You've probably all seen the Battle of Algiers. But then the ones who didn't leave, and this includes people who supported the revolution. It's just that they didn't know that they were right, that their situation would be good. But then after they became independent in Algeria, for a wide variety of reasons, Algeria became unstable, and fundamentalists love instability, and the fundamentalists went in, and there was what's called a civil war between them and everyone else, and the Islamic fundamentalists or Islamists. And they killed somewhere between 100,000 and 190,000 people. And at that point, almost every Jew left Algeria. And a lot of them went to France. Some went to Morocco, some, other places, US. A lot of Tunisians in France. If you remember the Charlie Hebdo violence, almost all the Jews that were killed in the Charlie Hebdo Hyper Kasher, the kosher supermarket violence in Paris, almost all of them were Tunisian background Jews. And with that in mind, maybe I'll go on to the next section. Is this working okay, doing it like this? Good.
Oh, yes.
So we'll go on to France. French Jews. France has the world's third largest Jewish population, but we tend not to talk about them or think about them, which is one reason I wanted to do this. So here's just one estimation of population. I think a lot of population charts I've seen have Israel larger than the US right now, but this one has the US larger than Israel. And here's France, somewhere around 446,000 or maybe 450,000. And just for comparison, Canada is a little bit lower than France. UK is here. Sadly, what's happening in the Ukraine right now, or Ukraine, we say now. A lot of people think Ukraine should be up here, that the statistics are bad because of assimilation. But France has the third largest Jewish population in the world. And we don't think about them very much, but when we do think about them lately, we think about all the violence against Jews that's been happening there for 20 or 25 years, with good reason. I mean, it's terrible and it's serious. But there's a lot more going on in France than that. And France has an old Jewish population, an established one, lots of really interesting and exciting institutions, and ordinary things like restaurants. So here is a French Jewish restaurant. It happens to be my favorite falafel shop in the Jewish neighborhood that some of you probably know, the Marais, which is increasingly not a Jewish neighborhood anymore, but still has some great places. And of course, the people here are, maybe half of these are tourists and some are people from the neighborhood, modernized Jews, of course. It's interesting if you look, this is a picture I took when I was there. The owners are probably North African because this is their rabbi or one of their rabbis or something like that. Notice the walls are like Jerusalem stone for the falafel shop. But just to give you a completely different picture, here's another Jewish restaurant. This is a kosher restaurant. The falafel shop is not. And this is in a different neighborhood. This is in an Orthodox neighborhood in the 19th, the 19e, in a neighborhood called Belleville. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with that neighborhood, but this neighborhood is north and west of Butte-Chaumont Park. So this says, always imitated, never equaled, which I love. Toujours imité, jamais égalé. And it's glatt kosher. Notice they spell kosher with a C. And this is a new thing they have for carryout, which is actually a really good deal. 2 hamburgers, a Coke, and French fries for €8. Hamburgers seem to have become popular in Paris in the last few years. But this is, they sell falafel, shawarma, schnitzel, hamburger, just an ordinary restaurant in an Orthodox neighborhood. And across the street, you can't really see it, is a kosher Chinese restaurant. So a couple of different pictures of what Jewish life is like in France. Here are just some old institutions in France, Jewish institutions. Some of you have probably gone to this one. This is the Museum of the Art and History of Judaism, which is basically the Jewish museum. And if you were there right now, these are all the things you could see. Interviews, art, I'm not sure what this is exactly, looks like photographs. And this is their beautiful, beautiful building, old French beautiful building. They also have lots of lectures and great performances. Like I heard a wonderful performance of a Sephardic singer there once, not too long ago. Here's an institution that's really interesting that I can talk more about later if you would like. It's called the consistoire, which is in English would be the consistory. It's originally when Jews were emancipated or made citizens in France, this consistoire was formed to be the representative body of Jews to the government. So it's actually a governmental institution. And they're getting ready for Purim, just like we are. Neat. Yeah, it is neat. And I'm telling you, their Hamantashen will be really good. This is the Elie Wiesel Academic Institute, the Institut Universel Elie Wiesel. This is a really interesting place. It's not a university, but it's kind of university level lectures for non-university people. So if you visit France, you can hear something about incest in the Bible, or you can hear something about the origins of Zionism by Georges Ben-Suzanne, another North African name, Judaism and Islam, the hidden Jewishness of Franz Kafka, So these are just some interesting things going on in Paris in Jewish life. If I haven't already mentioned this, the Jewish population in France is primarily North African, which is a surprise to most people, including me, when I first heard it. The figure I heard at the Jewish Studies Convention in Chicago a few months ago is 65 to 70% North Africa. Why? Well, because of the Shoah, something like 70,000 Jews were killed in the Shoah, and then the immigration from North Africa, particularly these three countries. Here is a North African synagogue. I want to start with the consistorial synagogues. So the consistoire that I told you about actually built some of the most beautiful big synagogues in France. And here is one that I stole off someone's wedding site. But it's such a great photograph because it's from above and it shows people actually doing something there. And so this is the grandness of the kind of Judaism that was created by the French government, actually, this consistorial Judaism. You know, France didn't have reform. Reform was a German movement started in Berlin. It does now, but it didn't then. What they did to modernize Judaism in France was not done by the Jews, it was done by the government, by the consistoire, working with Jewish representatives to create this modernized form of Judaism, because they were a little worried about all these small synagogues where people weren't very modern, they were saying strange things. So they created a modern form of Judaism, and they built some of these incredible synagogues. And you'll notice it has upper levels and lower levels, and the women were probably up above originally. But here at this wedding, and I think it's probably an American wedding, or somebody American who lives in France. The men are on the right and the women are on the left, but these are all modern, you know, people in contemporary clothing. Don't know who the rabbi is, whether it was Ashkenazic or Sephardic. These are basically Ashkenazic synagogues, but since the Jews are, primarily North African, when I was I actually went to a wedding there. I wasn't going there for a wedding. I was just going with a young Israeli. I was taking a French class together with her and we were wandering around. We went in and there was a wedding going on. So we stayed for the wedding. And the rabbi was North African and the chanting and so forth was North African. Probably here not, because they're probably from the US. So it's probably Ashkenazic. This is the second largest synagogue in France. The first largest is the Victoire synagogue. Let's see, how do I get back to show you so it's Jessica and Noah's wedding is what we were looking at. Let's see, how do I get?
Reminds me of a smaller central synagogue in New York City.
Yeah, I know, it reminds me a bit of that too. And here, if you've been to Paris, I know some of you have been in Paris, you know there's a great Art Deco decorations at all the entryways. This isn't the most beautiful one, but at the end, they're green and they're right at the entryway to the subways. And the same person who designed those, a socialist architect named Guimard, also designed this Art Nouveau synagogue, which is in the Marais, M-A-R-A-I-S, if you're interested. And I really love the synagogue. It's now ultra-Orthodox. I think it may be Chabad. You can tell they're using the old Hebrew, right? Agudas HaKahilos, instead of, you know, the Sephardic or Israeli type Hebrew that we do now. So that's a couple. Here is a North African synagogue, but I want to say, you know, North African Jews are very acculturated and assimilated into French life and French Jewish life. They don't all go to North African synagogues. Some don't go to any synagogue, right? And some go to the liberal synagogues. well, most synagogues in France are Orthodox, but there are liberal, what they call liberal synagogues. And in a liberal synagogue, you're going to have some Ashkenazic Jews, but also North Africans. But this happens to be a Moroccan, mostly Moroccans that I went to in 2015. I asked a guy on the street, could I go to the service? And he said, oh, sure, which was very generous, right? He didn't know if I was a terrorist or not. He took me to the door to go upstairs where the women were. And they were very nice and very hospitable. And I feel terribly guilty because I took these photographs, which I probably shouldn't have. Every time I look at this, I feel like I probably shouldn't have. But so here are a couple of women greeting each other on Purim. And it says, here we pray, we don't talk. Then it says, silence constructs, chatter destroys, which I assume means that it's constructive to be quiet and, don't talk. So, of course, first they put the Jews upstairs, the women upstairs, then they're surprised that they're chattering up there. Here they are reading the scroll of Esther. Here is looking down on the men's section. And he was chanting the most beautiful chanting, I assume Moroccan. It was really wonderful. Kind of weird to be up in the women's section, though not my preference, obviously. I see we have a dog with us. Here's what they're praying from, the women. And here was out on the street afterwards. It's Purim, right? Great costume. And here I'm going to show you something that's a little sad. This was 2015, so this was right after the Charlie Hebdo events that were so famous. If you look, here are a couple of men talking to each other after the service, and in the background is a soldier, not a policeman, a soldier with submachine gun. And there were several all around. You are not allowed to take photographs of them, so I managed to sneak one in by taking a photograph of these two guys. If you take photographs, they wonder why you're doing that. It was a very difficult time. I can talk about that too, if you're interested. I learned a lot about that from one of the rabbis there. But here's a liberal synagogue. This is a liberal synagogue from CJL, the one of the two liberal movements. Here they are waiting for security to let them into the synagogue for the Seder. Notice you'll see a lot of Jewish men wearing these caps. Now, often they're doing that because you are told by everyone in France, not just in 2015, but to this day, you should not wear a kippah on the street because it's not safe. This is the first woman rabbi in France, Myra, the wonderful, sweet seeming woman. And this is her husband, Tom Coleman, who is from Portland. He has his own Franco-American synagogue. She has her own synagogue, and she's inspiring a lot of women to become rabbis. This is macaroons. You can bet that they're really good. There's just some people, they look kind of like us, except he's wearing a beret. This is really interesting. They sat me down with some other women, and it turns out this woman and this woman were getting married by Pauline Beb. And I believe I remember correctly that it was the first wedding of lesbians, a Jewish wedding of lesbians in France. Very nice people. She is a feminist theorist at one of the universities. I've forgotten her name. So that's just to give you a sense both of kind of liberal life and also more Orthodox life. Here's another liberal synagogue. I won't show you all of these, but this is another one of the original three women rabbis. Her name is Delphine Horveler, very dynamic person. We'll come back to her later. very interesting, also a philosopher. But everything else, she was a model, she studied medicine, she's written 6 books, and just terrifically interesting dynamic. Liberal Judaism. Most synagogues I mentioned in France are Orthodox, but liberal Judaism is growing. And recently, the dominant movement of liberal Judaism in France have all joined forces. So they've kind of unified. They were in kind of separate subgroups. And it's just part of an effort to provide more liberal Judaism for the Jews in France who want to be religious but don't want to be Orthodox for various reasons. Here, happy as a Jew in France. It's an old phrase. France actually was the first country in Europe to grant citizenship to Jews in 1791. So Jews didn't originally have citizenship in European nations, just like they had a lesser status in North Africa. Many, of course, you probably know, became very successful in social and in political life. Prime Minister, for example. So the saying was, happy as a Jew in France. Jews benefited from the French idea of droit de l'homme, the rights of man, and of liberty, equality, fraternity, which is even engraved on the exterior of some of those great consistorial synagogues in France. Okay, so that's the right hand. The left hand is, I should do it in reverse. That's the left hand. The right hand, at the same time, there's a very strong old right wing in France that is traditionally anti-Semitic. You probably have heard about the Dreyfus case or about Vichy France. So, if you're interested, here is a lot of information, very accessible information about Judaism in France that you can get off this website, which you can look at later if you're interested. So you have these 2 tendencies in the Franco-French, not the North Africans, but the Franco-French, because it's not only North African Jews who came to France, it's also other North Africans. You have that wonderful tradition of the rights of man, what today we call human rights, equality for everyone. Their way is not life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but liberty, equality, fraternity. But you also have the old monarchical tradition, the old right-wing Catholic tradition. Not that all Catholics are right-wing, but there are Catholics who are right-wing and there are Catholics who are anti-Semitic. So I think I'll stop again there and see if you have any questions or anything you'd like me to expand on. Well, one thing that I could expand on is this idea of the consistorial. I think it's one of the most interesting things that that helps you realize that Judaism is really different in different places, and even secularism is different in different places. In France, they have their own kind of secularism, which is called laïcité, laicism. And in France, secularism really means you're supposed to leave your religion at home and not express it in the public sphere. Whereas here, we would call that a violation of separation of church and state. So in France, you're not supposed to wear conspicuous religious symbols in school. Which means you're not supposed to wear a veil if you're a Muslim, and you're not supposed to wear a big star if you're a Jew. But the origin of that is that France was Catholic and it was a monarchy and it was Catholic, and the clergy had a great deal of influence there. So they wanted to get religion as far out of the public realm as possible. So their idea is, in France, this idea of republicanism or this laïcité means that you're not even legally, the government is not allowed even to take statistics based on religion. The state is really supposed to be separate and distant from religion. And there's a saying that some of you may have heard, you can be a Jew at home and a man in the street, which actually comes from a Jewish poet whose name was Gordon. But the French really, that's the way they think of secularism there, laïcité, is that you don't express your religion in public, it's private. Whereas in the US, our secularism came from people who came to the original US from countries where they were not allowed to exercise their religion. So the main issue was to allow exercise. It was not to keep religion out of the state, because it was a new state that wasn't originally religious. And in France, the consistoire, this is true also in Germany, the government actually controlled their way of thinking. Natalie, can you put yourself on mute so we don't hear your dog for a second? Thanks. So the government actually controlled religion, and they actually created this new form of Judaism that was a kind of modernized Judaism. I thought that was just fascinating when I learned about it the first time. Any questions? You see if there's anything else that I would like to expand on.
Deborah, I just want to thank you. This is super interesting. And I was in France for work a couple years ago, and I was in a taxi and I had to call the hotel because I forgot something. So I said my name, Jane Grossman, and then the taxi driver, when I was finished, looks back and he says, "Juif?" I said, "Oui?" And they took off his baseball cap.
Yeah.
Had his yarmulke. And he said he was leaving France. It just felt too dangerous. This was about 5 years ago.
Yeah, my next topic will be about the violence. But, you know, I've been told, I went to one of the liberal synagogues and I was walking out of it and forgot that I had one of their kippot on. And a very nice guy came up to me and said, pointed to it, said, told me that he wasn't worried that I was taking their kippah, but that I shouldn't wear it because it's not safe. And I've had several people tell me that. But the problem with that, of course, is if you're Orthodox, for many Orthodox, it's part of their custom to wear identifiable clothing. So they're not going to take them off. But Jews who aren't that way do.
But it's not safe. It's not safe, and they might wear it in their neighborhood, but I doubt they wear them all over town in Paris or anywhere else.
Well, it's ironic because the custom is to wear these baseball caps over your kippah. But of course, now everyone knows that that a lot of Jews wear baseball caps. So it does kind of make them at least somewhat.
Right.
So it's very sad if you think of the idea that France was, happy as a Jew in France. French were very involved. French Jews were very involved in the government, even prime minister, all kinds of things, Jewish life. And now there's been a lot of violence, and it's a scary place. But you should not get the idea that it means that everywhere you go, a Jew has to worry about violence. I mean, mostly it's just ordinary life, but there are these incidents of violence. They haven't been the same as here, where there've been, like shootings in a synagogue. It's been more individual. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the level of violence there and here may be the same now. I don't know. I'm not so sure theirs is higher than ours if you consider the number of people killed in some of the recent incidents. I'm not sure. But.
Deborah, I just wondered if you could give some kind of an idea of how much liberal Judaism is growing, because in France, because when I was, in Ethan's case, as you have heard, they were sort of like really against liberal Judaism.
Yeah, right.
And basically it was unheard of, and especially outside of Paris, unheard of. But you give the impression that it's growing. Do you have any idea by how much, or?
It's too bad I didn't look up some figures on that before this, but it's growing and it's consolidating. And I'll tell you a little more about that in the last point I talk about today, which is about the women in Judaism in France today. There's also a small Masorti, what we call conservative, but what in Israel and France is called Masorti, but it's pretty small. I think there are only, at least in Paris, and that's probably all of them, I think there are only 2 or maybe 3 synagogues. But it's also very dynamic, and it's an option. You know, one of the really interesting things about Jews in France is there's a lot of back and forth between Jews in France and Jews in Israel. A lot of Jews in France have very close relatives in Israel, because when Jews left North Africa, some went to France and some went to Israel. And for a variety of reasons, sometimes because somebody else was there. It's true with a lot of our families. Why did my family live in Michigan? Because, you know, Uncle so-and-so had moved to Albion, Michigan, and then everyone else went and followed him. Some just because at the point they left, that was the place they could get into. Some had preferences either for Israel or France, and so they went to the one they preferred. But there's so much back and forth between the two. And you have people in France who were in ultra-Orthodox synagogues in Israel, who gave up ultra-Orthodoxy, moved to where their relatives are in France, and they would like to be part of a synagogue, but they don't want to be part of an Orthodox synagogue. So Masorti is a good option. There's a little gay synagogue, in sort of a synagogue community in Paris, and was chatting with a woman who had gone through that she was ultra-Orthodox, and she was also gay, and so she came to France, and she ended up attending one of the 2 Masorti synagogues there. And there is, you know, there's gay pride every year, and there is a little Jewish gay movement, which is very interesting. You know, something I hadn't thought about is the gay men in particular in France, both had families that went through the Shoah, and then also went through AIDS, losing a lot of friends and partners through AIDS. So it's kind of a difficult experience that they've had. Okay, I think
just have a quick question.
Yeah. Great.
Oh, so I'm just wondering about the makeup of the liberal Jewish community in France. You mentioned that about 75% of the Jews are of North African origin. How much of them are they making up the liberal Jewish community, or is it the Ashkenazi part that are making up the liberal Jewish community? How does that divided?
I can't give you statistics because I don't actually have them, but it's mixed. You know, I've gone to Delphine Horvillers synagogue. I'm, you know, like always going to the synagogues where they have women rabbis, and they sing different kinds of music. They have both North African names and German names like mine, that kind of thing. So it's a mixture. Also, they have people of Spanish background. So when you hear the music, Marilyn will know about this. They have Ashkenazic music, but they also have what's called Portuguese Rite, which is really Spanish music. So yeah, a lot of North African Jews in the liberal synagogues. And, you know, a lot of intermarriage too. So like my colleague friend who's actually Israeli now, but grew up in Paris, her family is primarily Tunisian. You know, they're liberal Jews, they're not Orthodox. So let's see. Let me go on to the next topic, which is the recent violence in France. It's just such a terrible and sad topic. I hate to even talk about it, but it is important. So there's been repeated violence against Jews in France for the last 20 or 25 years. I don't know the exact beginning, but it's something like that. Most of it has in fact been committed by Muslims, primarily second generation Muslims living in the working class neighborhoods, which in France are in the suburbs, not in the city. the banlieue. Most Muslims in France are not involved with this, you should know. They're not part of this violence. It's mostly caused by young men who are living in the slums, and there's a lot of discrimination against Muslims, in especially visible, more recent immigrant Muslims in France. A lot of police violence against Muslims in France. They, it's kind of typical that the violence is committed by second generation, not first generation immigrants, because they're busy just trying to make a life of things, but who feel they have no future and get radicalized by Islamists. But most Muslims don't like the Islamists. For example, the Algerian Muslims in France, a lot of them hate the Islamists because of what they did to Algeria, right? So it's not that Muslims are against Jews, it's that there are some radicalized Muslims who are. Here's a neighborhood where there's been some violence. These are some things on my blog. Some of these photographs I took, I have a little blog, I put them on. But I think this is a really, and a lot of the more radicalized mosques and things are not in Paris proper, they're in the suburbs, but this is a neighborhood that has a pretty large immigrant population. It's an area I like to stay in actually when I go there. And here's an Orthodox guy, because this neighborhood has Chinese, Jews, Africans, North Africans, and everyone else. It's also rapidly gentrifying, so all this may change. This is on Rue de Belleville. So here's an Orthodox guy walking by where I was sitting, and a Chinese, presumably a Chinese guy, because there's a big Chinese community. As you walk down the street, here's a Tunisian restaurant, Tunisian Jewish restaurant, right? It says Tunisian specialties. This is called René et Gabin, René and Gabin's restaurant. Kosher, certified by the Beit Din, with Tunisian food. Just really fun place. Then you walk a little further, great mural. Geralda, I know, loves Paris, and I'm sure she'd love that mural because she's a mural specialist. Then you walk a little further, here's a clothing store for there are a lot of like recent immigrant Muslims in this neighborhood, as well as a whole slew of Ashkenazic Orthodox synagogues, plus the Chinese and the Africans and all the gentrifying people coming in. But notice this is for probably very, fundamentalist isn't the best term, but I'm not thinking of a better one. But this is the clothing store for the women. Pastry shop. I love North African sweets. They're kind of like those Greek sweets. And then you go a little further down the street, and this actually is a radical mosque in the same neighborhood. I didn't realize it was a radical mosque till I read about it later. And if some of you heard about the recent case of a woman named Halimi, who was, excuse me for having to bring up these awful topics, but she was killed by a mentally disturbed anti-Semitic Muslim guy who threw her out of a window to her death. It's just a terrible case.
Her apartment window.
Yeah, out of her apartment. They were neighbors. I mean, the Orthodox Jews have synagogues here and they stay, but and I'm fine in that neighborhood because I don't look Jewish, quote unquote, look Jewish, whatever that means. But if you're Orthodox, you do. And her apartment is right around the corner, more or less. Well, maybe 3 blocks and then around the corner, 2 blocks and then around the corner from this mosque. So, it's tough. A lot of the Jews have moved out of this neighborhood, but some, because of their connections, have stayed. Here's a Jewish butcher shop, boucherie, charcuterie, traiteur, chez Jojo, I guess. His name is Jojo. A lot of graffiti on their security door. Kosher butcher is what this is. In the same neighborhood with these radicalized immigrant Muslims. And here are two non-consistorial synagogues that are right next to each other. Everyone wonders, why don't they just join up and become one? You know, they're probably slightly different in some way. These are North African. I haven't gone into them, but I'd like to sometime to hear their music. And another mural. And the gentrification is going up the street very rapidly. So a lot of Jews moved out of this neighborhood because of the problems. But my guess is as this neighborhood sadly gets more gentrified that they'll move back. Let me just go through the rest of the violence topic. And is it okay if I wait, or do you?
Oh, yes, I put my hand up. I knew you'd call on me when it was time.
So, you know, there is a lot of violence, but it's not as if it's happening every moment. It's, you know, it's periodic. Here's another neighborhood where there's been violence. And here's that, I showed you this before. I actually had seen this photograph before I went to Paris this year. This was the year I spent 3 months in Paris when I was on sabbatical. And that was when all that violence happened. And if you look right here, this is a bullet hole. There was some, what people call excuse me, I need a little sip of water to pronounce this word. It's called stochastic terrorism, in which some group announces that people should do certain deeds, and then people just do it. So somebody at the top level will say in their emails, you know, people should shoot Jews or something like that, and then people will just do it. And for a while there were some shootings in this neighborhood. I mean, no one was hurt, but it's just, and I had read about that before I went, and I actually one day was walking along and saw this window that I had seen in a photograph. This also is just to show you the Orthodox neighborhood. This is not the hyper kasher that was the subject of violence. It's a chain, right? And hyper just means super, as in supermarket. So what this means is kosher supermarket. Just to show you an Orthodox neighborhood. Here's an Orthodox guy going into the super, the hyper. And here's that Chinese restaurant. Here's French, like the put little beautiful things in windows. Here's a Hamza. A good deal. 15, is that 15 euros? That seems cheap. Matzah stuff. Here's a guy with a baseball cap in the kosher super. Here's some of you who've spent time in Israel know Ovadia Yosef, Sephardic or North African. In Israel, they call them Mizrahi, right? Mizrahi means Eastern, but I like to say North African. In France, they say Maghrebin, you know, Maghrebian, the Maghreb, but we sometimes forget there were Jews in Africa, so I like to say North African. Some kids stuff, yarmulkes. This is a very fancy, expensive store. This is the national drink of Tunisia, which was invented by some Jews in Tunisia. I love it. It's called buka. It's made from figs and it's very strong. And this is kind of probably the upper end of buka, because this is a high-end store in that neighborhood. And a kosher butchery. So, you know, they're still in the neighborhood, even though it's not very safe, because they have institutions and so forth, and they just don't abandon their neighborhood. Like my brother's mother-in-law had a deli in a neighborhood that became kind of violent. You can't just leave if you've got a life there. I wanted to say this. It's not that there's some specifically Muslim type of anti-Semitism exactly, sometimes called the new anti-Semitism. It's not quite that simple. We already saw that in North Africa, that a lot of the tension had to do with colonialism that set people against each other. And a lot of that was transferred into France. So it's not really new. It's the same phenomenon that was going on in North Africa. So I just thought I'd mention that. Also, some of it has to do with Israel. Some of the anti-Semitism has to do with Israel, much more than in the US, by the way, where most of it is not about Israel. At least that's my sense. There it is, because they come from countries that are anti-Israel. So I'm not saying this to deny, first of all, that it is committed by Muslims mostly, this what people have called the new stuff, but to not like kind of essentialize it as some fundamentally Muslim eternal kind of thing. Jews and Muslims got along pretty well in North Africa through much of their life there. And it's also not to deny that it's anti-Semitic or that it's horrible. It is horrible. I don't even want to tell you about some of these incidents because they're terrible. I also wanted to mention that it's much more problematic for the Orthodox. So we all should care about the Orthodox, just like it is in some parts of New York right now, because they're visible. Another reason not to call this the new anti-Semitism, because right now I think the new anti-Semitism is the old anti-Semitism coming back. The new anti-Semitism, so-called the Muslim stuff, is not new. But there's starting to be more just French, or what I call Franco-French anti-Semitism coming back. There have been issues about Jews in universities, for example. This is like a really awful case of a medical student who was intensely bullied in very anti-Semitic ways in the university in France, in Paris.
Yeah, it's just I'm mindful of time that we're pushing on about 4:30 in about 5 minutes. So if you're going to get to women.
Okay, so we'll go on. So women in French Judaism. This is a really great photo op of the original first 3 women rabbis in France. And where are they? This is for all of you who are in Torah study. They're in the Rashi house, the new Rashi Center in Troyes, France, Troyes. Where they posed together because, of course, you probably all know that Rashi had 3 daughters. Here they are. So I didn't want to end with violence. I wanted to end with something positive. So this is in 2019. This is the Rashi Center. Across the street is the Rashi Center Synagogue, and this is the Rashi Center courtyard. These are all medieval buildings. So those of you who've been studying medieval rabbis in Torah study, of course, they've all been totally rehabbed recently and look quite beautiful. Here's the synagogue. There's some beautiful things there. That's the courtyard for the Rashi Center. And here they are again. And here are some others. These are not all rabbis. This is from Israel, France. Some of these are rabbis, some are people at the conference. Just to give you an idea of what's happening with women in Judaism, there's Delphine Horveler again. And so there were 3, only 3 for quite a while. Now there are 5, and they're all liberal. This is one of the new ones. She's in Strasbourg. This is Pauline Bev again, the very first one. This is one of the new ones. She's in Lyon, so it's not true anymore that they're only in Paris. And this is really interesting. This is, I've forgotten her first name, Ackerman Summer, who will be an Orthodox rabbi in France. She's studying in the US in the Covevay Torah, the Open Orthodox. They're calling her, she'll be an Orthodox rabbi. They call them Maharats. They're almost rabbis. And pretty soon she will be one. And here is Delphine Horveler has gotten so much press that she wasn't in that article, but if you're interested in her, she's really fascinating. This is a really great article about her. She's a philosopher, just everything. So she's gotten a lot of press. And let's see what else I have. Oh, and here is this organization. So this meeting that I was showing you here was done by this group called Les Filles de Rashi, the Daughters of Rashi. This was their first meeting. They haven't had a second meeting because of COVID. And here is their website if you're interested. They're planning to have a second meeting of Les Filles de Rashi this May. So a lot of good things going on in Jewish life in France, but also a lot of violence. But of course, violence against Jews is increasing here as well. So Edna.
Oh, well, going back to the violence, is there any color differential?
Is there any color differential between North African Jews and French Jews?
Either from in terms of radicalized Muslims or the victims of radicalized Muslims?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. You know, a lot of the violence in France is in North African neighborhoods against Jews. The first time I asked someone at Tom Cohen's Franco-American synagogue, where the services are in English, French, and Hebrew, I asked someone how bad it was, and they said, well, you know, it's not so bad for us because we're not in those neighborhoods. And so it's often violence from North African, radicalized North African Jews against North African Jews. And do North Africans have a color difference from, say, Ashkenazic Jews? I mean, they're generally not Black, although, you know, Jacques Derrida, who I showed you earlier, I know a lot about him because he's a philosopher I work on. If you see early pictures of him, he looks pretty dark. I've shown students, a group of students, young students that includes Derrida, and said, pick him out. And they don't pick him out because he almost looks Black. And they're not expecting that. But generally, no, North Africans are kind of maybe a little darker than me, a little darker, kind of a sallow color. So you could be talking to a North African and know it because a little darker, or you could be talking to a North African you just met and not know it.
Isn't it true that when the Jews left Algeria and came to France, they were called pieds noirs, black feet, which is kind of a pejorative term?
Well, the pieds noirs are actually the French who went to North Africa and then came back.
Oh, so not Jews, not specifically Jews.
Well, apparently I learned that there's some complication of the answer to that among young scholars right now. I just learned this a few months ago, but basically no. I mean, basically the Jews in Algeria. Well, who were the Jews in Algeria? A lot of them, you know, came in the first few centuries after the expulsion. The destruction of the temple, and a lot of them came from Spain. But then you have others. So they weren't necessarily people who went to Algeria when the colonial French went to Algeria. The pieds noirs generally are understood to be colonializers, and they were called black feet because the French actually looked down on them. The people in France looked down on them as, you know.
I think Jane, looks like Jane has her hand up. Jane Grossman, yeah?
Jane.
You're muted, honey. Unmute.
The word of 2022 and 21. You're muted. Deborah, thank you so much. And Rabbi Myra, this was so interesting. We learned a lot. And I loved starting with the music, especially, was just so joyful and wonderful.
Great.
Thank you. I also want to let people know, in case you don't, on Tuesday, we're hosting a forum on anti-Semitism here in the US. And I'm just going to click the link in case you don't know about it. And Deborah is speaking, and I'll be speaking, and Rabbi Benjamin and the other Rabbi Benjamin. And it's at 6 o'clock on Tuesday. You do need to register.
Yeah,
So
thank you. thank you so much for mentioning that. I was going to mention it, but I'm glad that you did.
How do
Natalie, I think you were next.
I was trying, could you
How do we
give some more
register for it?
details? I tried to register, I thought, through your Facebook page, but they were supposed to send me an email back and they didn't. So like,
The Zoom links will come out tomorrow around lunchtime-ish.
You're probably fine. Natalie.
So you're
Yeah,
probably
I just wanted to make the observation about color addressing, I guess it was Edna who was talking about it. There is a variety of color among Ashkenazi Jews and among North African Jews, because when I was in Shvei at Israel, some of the there's one guy from Tunisia who was very light skinned. There was a guy from Syria, I believe, who had red hair and freckles. And my grandfather could have passed for black, except for that he didn't have that kind of hair. I do when I let it go. But color is a really strange concept in the sense that Jews come in a variety of colors, and some people will typecast somebody as Jewish just based on the appearance, whether or not they're Jewish. And others will, as you say, be, nobody knows they're Jewish unless they actually tell them they're Jewish. So in a lot of ways, the color issue, which is very well thought of, when I say that's the wrong word. In the United States, the color issue is very strong. In other parts of the world, it's not as strong as in this country. And the distinctions, I believe, are made more on the basis of culture than they are of color per se.
For example, Jane's musician friend, Lior Sarfati, he to me looks North African. But if you didn't know what North Africans look like, you might just think he was whatever.
It's interesting. It's Sarfati in Hebrew means French. I mean, that's the word. Sarfat is the word used for France. And he might have that name because some of his ancestors came from Sarfat. I don't know.
I don't know the origin of that name. But if you when I have seen Lior Sarfati, he looks, I could imagine him sitting at a cafe with a bunch of North African guys.
Yeah.
Sitting or drinking coffee or something. But
and some of my friends
some North Africans look brown.
Some of them do. My best friend.
But most do not. Most do not. Generally, I think if you were looking at many North Africans, you wouldn't know just from color, and some you would know.
Some you would know.
Jewish life, just to finish this off, Jewish life is alive and well in France. There are, in fact, thousands moving, something like 2,000 or 3,000 moving away every year, but some are also moving back. They're moving to Israel, and it's too expensive, so then they move back. But it is a problem, and also I think it's more of a problem for the Orthodox. But it does not, by any stretch of the imagination, at this point anyway, spell the end of Jewish life in France. Jewish life in Europe is somewhat embattled. It just is. Also, I met a Jewish woman in the airport when I was leaving France once, and I was chatting with her about this, and I said, our young people seem to me to be leaving. She's young Jewish people. And she said, well, I hope they are. The economy is terrible for them. So there's that too. Young people in France, because they've had high unemployment for quite a long time. A lot of them are moving for that reason too. As usual, it's a mixture of things.
All right, a lot of stuff that we could probably spend forever on. Thank you, Deborah. This is just so packed and so interesting. My goodness gracious. I want to tell folks that the next one is April, whatever that first Sunday is. I think it's the 3rd. And the next Sacred Sinai series is a woman named Shelley Christensen, who is a national maven on ableism and how the Jewish community deals with folks with disabilities, physical and mental health issues as well. And so she should be really quite I'm really excited about her. She's really a neat lady, and this is her field and has been for decades. So it should be quite interesting. So again, thank you, Deborah, so much.
Well, thank
And
all of you.
Thanks everybody for coming, and have a good rest of the day and a good week.
See
And
you
I'm
all.
gonna stop recording, and I'm going to end our session. Yes, I want to stop.